goodness, I never saw that before. All right.
You want one?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Technology has finally reached the movies. After 40 years of paralysis. Yes.
I was interested in a phrase you used, in fact, to Hugh Weldon. You said that when you arrived in Hollywood, you had the confidence of ignorance.
Yes.
Can you tell me what that meant?
Well, it was pretty much like my beginnings in the theater. I had the confidence of ignorance, not knowing anything about it. There was no basis for fear. In other words, if you don't know that if you're walking along the edge of a cliff and you don't know it's the edge of a cliff, you have perfect confidence, you know. I didn't discover the cliff in the theater or in films until after I'd been in it for a while.
What happens then when ignorance turns into experience?
Then you have to be very careful not to listen to anybody, you know, because when you have to remember your old ignorance and ask for the impossible with the same cheerfulness that you did when you didn't know what you were talking about.
It does seem that you tried to recreate a sort of innocence in your approach to every single film.
I like that very much. I think that's true. And I seldom like anything that's said about my films. So we're off to a good start.
But all the other stuff about being studied as a child prodigy.
Yes, I was, sort of. Yes, I had a very strange, I was spoiled in a very strange way as a child, because everybody told me from the moment I was able to hear that I was absolutely marvelous. I never heard a discouraging word for years, you see. I didn't know what was ahead of me. I painted it, they said, nobody's ever seen such painting, you know. I played, nobody's ever played like that. And it just seemed to me no limit to what I could do.
There's another legend that seems to have attached itself to you over the years, and that's that you're a profligate spender, that you go way over on your budget and your shooting schedule.
I've never gone over schedule or over budget.
Nor on Kane.
In fact, we were under budget on Kane and under schedule, but we did that by a trick, because I said, I don't know anything about movies, so for about 10 days I'm just going to shoot tests. What we did was shoot Kane. We shot 10 days of Kane before we admitted we were actually shooting. But we would have been under schedule anyway.
Do you get upset these days, and there's now so much literature on you, do you get upset by some of those legends, particularly the ones to do with people, the ones that suggest that you've behaved irresponsibly towards them?
Very badly. I'm much too upset about them. All my loving friends and keep telling me to stop brooding about it, but it bothers me terribly. Anything that has to do with my behavior. I don't mind how they criticize what I do, but the total lies about me bother me much more than they ought to. I don't know why I'm so touchy about it. I went into Mr. Chow's restaurant in London once to have lunch alone. I like to eat lunch alone or dinner alone. I brought a book, and they have Italian waiters there, you know. An Italian waiter came and said to me in Italian, "Did you ever make a picture after Citizen Kane?" And I had just been told by Hugh Weldon that I was out of fashion in one of his famously tactful moments. So this came at the wrong moment. And I said patiently to him, "Yes, after Citizen Kane, I made Magnificent Ambersons, and then I listed my pictures. Now, Joan Didion wrote a piece in Esquire a few months afterwards, which she described me coming in to Mr. Chow's with impressive silence and how all heads turned. I opened a book and sat reading it. studying the book and so on, and then suddenly the silence was broken by me saying, I made Citizen Kane in 1940 and so on. Well, you know that I've been brooding about that thing for 6 years now. That I just sat and delivered a monologue to the audience of lunches at Mr. Chow's about the pictures I'd made, you know. So those kind of things do make me brood a bit. But that's the worst of them. That's my real obsession. The picture of somebody sitting by himself in a restaurant and suddenly reciting his screen credits. I've never had a friend in my life who wanted to see a magic trick. You know?
Yeah.
I don't know anybody who wants to see a magic trick. So I do it professionally. It's the only way I get to perform. You know? You know, there are people in the world who say, show us a trick, you know. I went once to a birthday party for Louis B. Mayer with a rabbit in my pocket, which I was going to take out of his hat. And on came Judy Garland and Danny Kaye and Danny Thomas and everybody you ever heard of. And then Al Jolson sang for 2 hours, and my rabbit was peeing all over me, you know. And at the dawn was starting to rise over the Hillcrest Country Club as we said goodnight to Louis B. Mayer, and nobody'd asked me to do a magic trick. But the rabbit and I went home. Unsung.
What makes a good magician? He said seriously.
Seriously. What makes a good magician? He's a man who can get that rabbit out in time. Are we on?
Yeah.
Yes, our viewers will know that because this is on film, there are conversations that go on between reloading. And somebody said that Touch of Evil seemed very unreal and yet real. And I corrected that statement and said what I was trying to do was to make something which was unreal but true. And I think that's the definition of the highest kind of theatricality, the best kind. And that's the kind of theatricality that can exist in films, too, as well as theater. And I think, because there is, you know, what is more unreal and stylized than Cagney? It's a totally stylized, unreal performance. No human being ever behaved the way he does. And every moment of Cagney, entire life in films is truth. He never had a second that wasn't true. You know, that's the... He certainly was larger than life. He did everything dangerously and, you know, as though we were playing in Madison Square Garden. And it was always cinematically true, but unreal. And that's the difference, I guess, I think. It's very tempting to show it as the total uselessness of the director's job, too.
Do you actually think that the director is overrated?
Oh yes, oh yes. I think there are the exceptions are the exceptional directors, of which there are very few up to now. But the actual job of the director in 99% of all movies is minimal. It's the only really easy job around. It really is, you know. And if you can fool the people for years if you're a good producer. The director who is by nature a good producer can make a great name for himself and live to a great age covered with glory and honors and never be found out. because a movie can be made by the actors, or by the cutter, or by the author. The best movies are made by the director.
Do directors often tell you how to do things when you're acting?
Oh, yeah, sure. Sure. I had one director in England who was wonderful. About halfway through every take, he'd say, "Cut. Cut." There'd be a long silence. I'd look at him, you know, and say, "How would you like me to do it?" Just do it again. So we'd do it again, and then there'd be this cut. We went through the whole picture like that, and I never knew what was giving him this pain. But directors get up to such things, you know. Some directors are great actors of being directors. René Clément, for example, is absolutely superb. He's like Lenny Bernstein or Van Karajan, you know, when he tells you how to sit in the chair and so on. It's just wonderful to watch. And Huston is the most fascinating of all actor-directors, because his performance of a director is so awe-inspiring and unnerving. It's absolutely marvelous, because it's at once tremendously charming and attractive and terrifying, you know. One picture, I've made a lot of pictures with it, made 5 pictures with it, and directed him in another. And one of the last pictures, he had a penthouse above the stage. And while they were relighting, he would go up to his penthouse. And then, slowly, there would get a silence on the set. We would realize that John had come back. That there would be a voice that would say, "All right, roll them. Action." Then, cut. He would go away in the darkness again. Well, everybody was speechless, you know. He can get up to the damnedest things you can imagine, you know, because he's a virtuoso actor of being a director.
Have you found yourself turning down, really, substantial parts because you wanted to get on with directing?
No, I haven't been offered them. I would have sold my soul to play The Godfather, for instance. But I never get those parts offered to me at all.
Why have you accepted so many parts, no matter how well you may have done them in the end, that were basically from bad scripts?
To live. I have to live in the, you know, if you're going to try to finance movies and live, you have to earn your money somehow. And I've done, most of my movies have been movies I didn't want to make. I've never done a movie that I disapproved of morally. The last star part that I was offered was Caligula, and I refused it on moral grounds. And yet there I would have been playing the leading part in an $8 million picture. And it would have been nice to do that, but I didn't even have a moment's doubt about not doing it. And the same thing would be for political reasons or anything like that. I've turned down a lot of things for those kind of reasons, but no great parts. I haven't had any great parts offered me, only a few good ones in all these years. They hire me when they have a really bad movie and they want a cameo that'll give it a little class, you know. So every time I do one of those things, I chip off something more from me as an actor. It's a kind of, you know, you're in liquidation when you do that. And that's why I hope to avoid it. Now that it looks as though I have a chance to direct a couple of more movies. And I've got a couple of good parts I've written for myself. It's the only way I know how to get them.
Nobody else will.
Yes. So I played all the great parts in the theater by running. You know, there's an old Yiddish saying in the Yiddish theater that the star is the man who owns the store, you know. So some of my stores have been rather small establishments, but I was the star because I owned it. I think I made essentially a mistake in staying in movies because it's a mistake I can't regret because it's like saying I shouldn't have stayed married to that woman, but I did because I love her. I would have been more successful if I hadn't been married to her, you know. I would have been more successful if I'd left movies immediately. Stayed in the theater, gone into politics, written anything. I've wasted the greater part of my life looking for money and trying to get along, trying to make my work from this terribly expensive paint box, which is a movie. And I've spent too much energy on things that have nothing to do with making a movie. It's about 2% movie making and 98% hustling. It's no way to spend a life.
Do you feel that's going to go on?
Oh, I'm going to go on being faithful to my girl. I love her. I fell so much in love with making movies that the theater lost everything for me, you know. I'm just in love with making movies. I'm not very fond of movies. I don't go to them much. I think it's very harmful to see movies for movie makers because you either imitate them or worry about not imitating them. And you should do movies innocently, the way Adam named the animals on the first day in the garden. And I lost my innocence. Every time I see a picture, I lose something. I don't gain. I never understand what directors mean when they compliment me, young directors, and say they've learned from my pictures. Because I don't believe in learning from other people's pictures. I think you should learn from your own interior vision of things and discover, as I say, innocently, as though there had never been D.W. Griffith or Eisenstein or Ford or Renoir or anybody.
And to me, Orson is so much like a destitute king. And destitute king, not because he was thrown away from the kingdom, but on this earth, the way the world is, there's no kingdom that is good enough for Orson Welles. That's the way I feel.